For nearly 3 billion years, life was a slow, blind dance in the dark. The world was a realm of touch and taste, of chemical trails and gentle currents. Creatures drifted, grazed, and rested in a silent, featureless world, unaware of the sun that warmed their shallow seas. They had no predators to flee from, no prey to stalk, because they could not see them. Then, something changed. A single cell mutated, developing a sudden, miraculous sensitivity to light. A dimple became a cup became a lens, and in a geological blink, the first true eye opened. In that moment, the world was born anew, not in fire, but in light. This single innovation did not just grant sight, it ignited the greatest arms race in the history of our planet, a biological explosion of hunters and hunted that would forever define the future of life on Earth. The age of innocence was over. The age of vision had begun. Imagine a planet alive, yet blind. For over 3 billion years, this was the reality of Earth. An ocean world, teeming with life, but a world known only through touch, taste, and vibration. There were no images, no vistas, no horizons. Life existed in a chemical and physical soup, a realm of immediate sensations. The dominant life forms were microscopic, single-celled organisms, masters of biochemistry. They formed vast, living carpets called microbial mats, their existence a slow, silent process of growth and reaction. Their perception was limited to the most fundamental inputs, the faint warmth of geothermal vents, the subtle gradient of nutrients in the water, the binary reality of light and shadow. They could sense the presence of the sun, not as an image, but as an energy source, a signal to begin the work of photosynthesis. This was a world without intent in the way we understand it. Predation was a matter of chance, a random encounter in the murky depths. A cell membrane might brush against a smaller, nutrient-rich particle and absorb it. Defense was equally passive, a tougher cell wall, a noxious chemical secretion. There were no chases, no evasive maneuvers, no strategic ambushes. The concept of a hunter actively seeking a target was an impossibility. An organism's entire universe was confined to the space it could physically touch or chemically sample. It was a planetary ecosystem running on autopilot, governed by currents, chemistry, and gravity. Life expanded, diversified, and built the very atmosphere that would later support more complex beings, all without a single eye to witness its own monumental achievements. For eons, this was the unbroken status quo, a world of feeling, but not of seeing. Life flourished in this sensory darkness, creating intricate ecosystems and surviving planetary upheavals. But it was a world in waiting. Deep within the genetic code of these simple organisms, a new potential was stirring. A set of instructions, refined by countless generations of trial and error, was about to be expressed. A biological switch was about to be flipped, one that would forever separate the history of life into two distinct eras, the time before sight and everything that came after. The dark, quiet eons were coming to an end, and the planet was on the verge of opening its eyes for the very first time. Roughly 600 million years ago, the long era of microscopic dominance began to yield. In the silent, sunlit shallows of the world's oceans, a new chapter of life unfolded. This was the Ediacaran Period, and its inhabitants were life's first great experiment in size and form. They were the Ediacaran biota, an assemblage of organisms so strange they seem like creations from another world. They were multicellular, some growing up to a meter in length, yet they bore little resemblance to the animals we know today. Creatures like Dickinsonia lay on the seafloor, their flat, segmented bodies looking like quilted bath mats. Frond-like organisms such as Charnia stood anchored to the seabed, swaying gently in the currents, capturing nutrients from the water. Others, like the slug-like Kimberella, may have crawled across the microbial mats, grazing on the rich film of bacteria. For decades, these fossils have puzzled scientists. Are they the ancestors of modern animals, or a completely separate branch of life that ultimately vanished? A failed experiment in evolution? Whatever their true nature, they populated a world that was fundamentally peaceful. The evidence in the fossil record points to a global ecosystem with little to no predation. These creatures were soft-bodied. They had no shells for protection, no claws for attack, no jaws for consuming other large organisms. They appear to have lived in a state of relative tranquility, a planetary garden where life was about absorbing, not hunting. Their world was still largely a sightless one. They navigated and fed using the ancient senses of touch and chemical detection. The garden was a static tableau, a slow-motion ballet of filter feeding and grazing. This gentle world order, which persisted for millions of years, represented a pinnacle of life in a world without advanced perception. But the garden's peace was fragile. Its end was not signaled by a sudden cataclysm or a dramatic climate shift, but by something far more subtle, preserved in the stone record. As the Ediacaran period drew to a close, new types of fossils began to appear. Tiny, mineralized shells, small, sharp spines, the first signs of armor. These were not the tools of peaceful grazers. They were the tools of defense. Their appearance signals a profound shift in the rules of life. The garden was no longer safe. Something new had arrived on the scene, something that prompted other organisms to shield themselves. The era of peace was over. To understand the revolution that vision would unleash, we must first appreciate the world it replaced. Life before sight was not a world of complete sensory deprivation. It was a world governed by a different set of rules, a different pace. It was a slow dance of interaction, dictated by the ancient senses of chemistry and touch. The primary way of understanding the environment was through chemoreception, the ability to taste the water. Organisms could detect dissolved chemicals, follow gradients towards a food source, or sense the presence of others through the waste they released. This allowed for a basic form of navigation, a chemical map of the immediate surroundings. Alongside this was mechanoreception, the sense of touch and vibration. A creature could feel the pressure changes caused by another organism moving nearby, or react to direct physical contact. These senses were highly effective, but they had a fundamental limitation: range. The world they revealed was intimate and immediate. To know something, you had to be very close to it, close enough to touch it or taste its chemical signature. This reality shaped the behavior of all life. Interactions were often accidental. A free-floating organism might drift into a current rich with nutrients and begin to feed. Another might bump into a stationary, frond-like creature and recoil. There was no long-distance awareness, no concept of the broader environment. Evolution, driven by this slow, close-quarters dance, proceeded at a stately pace. Adaptations were focused on improving chemical sensitivity, developing tougher skins, or becoming more efficient at absorbing nutrients from the surrounding water. The key ingredient missing was high-quality, long-range information. The world was a blur of sensations, a puzzle with most of its pieces missing. An organism could sense that something was near, but it couldn't know its size, its shape, its speed, or its intent. This information gap kept life locked in a reactive state. It could respond to what was happening in its immediate vicinity, but it could not anticipate. It could not plan. It could not see what was coming. But all the necessary components for a new way of sensing were slowly falling into place. The genetic machinery was becoming more complex. Cells were specializing, taking on new and intricate functions. And within some of these cells, a particular type of molecule was waiting for its moment, a molecule that reacted to photons, the fundamental particles of light. This was the key that would unlock the world, transforming the slow dance of life into a frantic, high-stakes race for survival. The dawn of the Cambrian Period, 541 million years ago, marks the most dramatic turning point in the history of life. It was an explosion of diversity and complexity, and it was ignited by a single spark: the ability to see. It did not begin with a fully formed, complex eye. The journey started with something much simpler: a humble patch of light-sensitive cells known as an eye spot. This was not an organ for seeing images. Its function was far more basic, yet utterly revolutionary. Within these specialized cells were proteins called opsins. When a photon of light strikes an opsin molecule, it changes shape, triggering a chemical cascade that sends a signal through the cell. For the first time, an organism had a dedicated biological mechanism to register the presence of light. This simple ability conferred an enormous advantage. A tiny, free-swimming larva in the ocean could now tell up from down. It could move towards the sunlit surface where photosynthetic food was plentiful, or retreat to the darker depths to avoid harmful ultraviolet radiation. It was the birth of purposeful navigation. The next evolutionary step was ingenious in its simplicity. By placing a layer of dark pigment cells behind the light-sensitive patch, the organism could now detect the direction of light. Light coming from one direction would be blocked by the pigment, while light from the other would stimulate the photosensitive cells. This created the pigment cup eye. Now, the organism didn't just know that light was present, it knew where it was coming from. We can still see this elegant design in simple creatures today, like the microscopic planarian flatworm. With this new tool, the world was no longer a uniform soup of sensations. It was now a space with direction, with a here and a there, a towards and an away. A shadow passing overhead was no longer just a momentary dimming. It was a directional event, a sign of something moving between the organism and its light source. This was the critical moment. The transition from simply sensing light to directional photoreception changed the very nature of existence. An organism was no longer a passive floater, subject to the whims of the current. It was an active agent, capable of moving with intent, guided by an external source of information. The spark had been lit. This simple cup of cells, this primitive biological compass, had divided the living world into those who could perceive direction and those who could not. The advantage was profound, and evolution would now race to refine this spectacular new sense. The cup was destined to deepen, to change shape, and to acquire new components, on its way to becoming the most powerful sensory organ the planet had ever known. Knowing the direction of light was a revolutionary advantage, but it was only the beginning. The next great leap would be to transform that simple directional signal into a detailed picture of the world. The evolutionary path to this breakthrough began with the simple pigment cup eye. As natural selection favored organisms with better perception, the cup-like structure became deeper and more pronounced. As the cup deepened, the opening at the top grew smaller relative to its depth. This anatomical shift created something remarkable: a pinhole camera eye. This design works on a basic principle of optics. By forcing light to pass through a very small aperture, it projects a focused, inverted image onto the light-sensitive surface at the back. For the first time in history, an organism could resolve an image. It could distinguish shapes and forms, not just light and shadow. A moving object was no longer an ambiguous stimulus. It was a defined shape with a trajectory. The world was coming into focus. We can see this type of eye today in the nautilus, a living fossil that gives us a window into this ancient stage of visual evolution. But the pinhole eye has a critical flaw. A tiny opening creates a sharp image, but it lets in very little light, resulting in a picture that is dim and lacks detail. To create a brighter, clearer image, the aperture needed to be wider. But a wider aperture would make the image blurry again. Life was faced with an optical paradox. The solution was one of evolution's greatest innovations. The journey began by covering the opening of the cup with a layer of transparent, protective cells. Over countless generations, this transparent layer began to thicken. As it did, its curvature began to bend the light passing through it, focusing it onto a single point. This was the genesis of the lens. The lens solved the paradox of the pinhole eye. It allowed for a wide opening to gather a large amount of light, while its convex shape actively focused that light to create a bright, sharp image on the retina. With the arrival of the lensed, image-forming eye, the visual revolution was complete. An organism equipped with this powerful new organ could see its world with breathtaking clarity. It could identify prey from a distance, spot a predator before it struck, and navigate complex environments with precision. The old world of touch and taste was rendered obsolete overnight. The age of the hunter and the hunted had truly begun, triggering the greatest arms race in history. To understand the revolution that sight unleashed upon the world, we must first understand sight itself. It is a story not of biology alone, but of pure physics. It begins with light. For eons, the sun bathed the earth in an invisible storm of photons, tiny packets of electromagnetic energy. These particles traveled from their stellar source, bounced off the surfaces of rocks, water, and primitive organisms, and continued their journey, carrying with them a reflection of the world they had touched. But for most of history, this information was lost, perceived only as warmth or the simple trigger for chemical reactions. There was nothing to interpret the intricate tapestry of data encoded in the light. The first step toward vision was the evolution of a molecule that could react to these photons. These were the opsons, proteins that, when paired with a light-sensitive chemical, could change shape when struck by light. This shape change initiated a chemical cascade, an electrical signal. A cell could now tell the difference between light and shadow. This was not seeing, but it was the beginning. A simple patch of these photosensitive cells offered a crucial advantage. It could detect the shadow of an approaching danger or the direction of the life-giving sun. This simple light-dark detection was the foundation upon which all else would be built. But to form an image, to truly see, light must be organized. Nature's first solution was an elegant feat of geometry, the pinhole. By recessing the patch of light-sensitive cells into a cup, an organism could gain a sense of direction. Light from one direction could only enter and strike one part of the cup, while light from another direction would strike a different part. The deeper the cup, the more refined the directional information became. If this cup deepened until the opening was just a tiny aperture, a pinhole, a blurry but coherent image of the outside world would be projected onto the cells within. The Nautilus still employs this ancient design today. It is a simple, effective way to turn light into a map of reality. Yet, the pinhole has a fundamental trade-off. A smaller hole creates a sharper image, but lets in very little light, making it useful only in bright conditions. A larger hole gathers more light, but produces a hopelessly blurry image. The ultimate solution, an evolutionary masterstroke, was the lens. A transparent, curved structure of protein that could bend light, gathering a wide spray of photons and focusing them down to a single, brilliant point. With a lens, an eye could be both wide open to gather ample light and still produce a sharp, detailed image. This was the critical innovation. The combination of a lens to focus the light and a sophisticated screen of photoreceptors, a retina to receive it, created the first true, high-fidelity camera in history. The physical components were now in place. The world was about to be seen for the very first time, and nothing would ever be the same. The evolution of a physical eye was only half the battle. An eye is merely a device for collecting data. The true revolution happened inside the organism, in the creation of a mind to interpret that data. Seeing is not a passive act of receiving light. It is an active, intensive process of computation. The world revealed by the lens was not a simple picture. It was a torrent of information about shape, color, texture, and, most importantly, motion. Processing this information required a staggering investment in neural hardware. Before vision, brains were simple nerve nets, designed to process information from touch and chemical trails, senses that are local and slow. An organism knew what was happening only when it physically contacted it or sensed its chemical signature nearby. Vision shattered these limits. It introduced the concept of over there. For the first time, an organism could perceive an object at a distance, long before it could be touched or tasted. This created a completely new dimension of awareness, a spatial map of the surrounding environment. The brain had to evolve to handle this map, creating new regions dedicated to processing the signals from the eyes. This visual cortex, even in its most primitive form, was a quantum leap in cognitive complexity. It had to learn to interpret patterns, to distinguish a rock from a potential food source, to separate the static background from a moving object of interest. This new sense fundamentally altered the perception of time. With sight, an organism could do more than just react. It could anticipate. It could see a predator approaching from afar and have time to hide. It could spot potential prey moving in the distance and plot a course to intercept it. This is the birth of strategy. The world was no longer a series of immediate sensations, but a dynamic arena where future events could be predicted and planned for. The mental timeline of an animal extended from a few seconds into minutes, a profound cognitive shift. The brain was no longer just a reaction machine. It was becoming a prediction engine. This new sensory dimension created a stark and unforgiving division in the nascent animal kingdom. There were now two kinds of creatures, the seers and the unseen. The seers possessed a window into a world of distance and motion, a strategic advantage so profound it was almost supernatural. The unseen, still navigating their world through touch and chemical whispers, were suddenly vulnerable in a way they had never been before. They were objects on a visual map they could not perceive, their movements tracked by minds that could predict their next step. The very fabric of existence had been rewoven. A new game was afoot, governed by new rules of perception. And in this game, to be seen was to be in peril. For 3 billion years, life was a quiet, slow affair. The oceans were dominated by soft-bodied, microbial mats and strange, plant-like organisms of the Ediacaran period. Life was largely stationary, passive, and simple. The fossil record from this time shows a world without pursuit, without defense, without the urgency of a hunt. Then, 541 million years ago, everything changed. In a geological blink of an eye, the planet witnessed a creative frenzy unlike any before or since. This was the Cambrian Explosion, a sudden and dramatic proliferation of complex, diverse animal life. And the trigger for this biological Big Bang was the evolution of sight. The evidence is etched in stone. In fossil beds like the Burgess Shale in Canada and the Chengjiang deposits in China, we find a bizarre and wonderful menagerie of creatures that seem to appear from nowhere. And for the first time, we find fossils with clearly preserved, sophisticated eyes. The most iconic animal of this new era is the trilobite. These arthropods, distant relatives of modern insects and crustaceans, were pioneers of vision. Their remarkable compound eyes were not made of soft protein, but of calcite, the very mineral that forms rock. Each lens was a single, perfect crystal, intricately arranged to give the trilobite a nearly 360-degree view of its world. They were the first animals to look upon their world with crystalline clarity. This newfound ability to see had immediate and dramatic consequences. For a trilobite, the world was no longer a vague collection of chemical gradients and tactile sensations. It was a landscape of opportunities and threats. They could navigate complex terrain, find food with efficiency, and, crucially, spot movement. But if the trilobite could see, it meant that others could see it. The dawn of vision was also the dawn of predation as an active, guided strategy, and this ignited the first and greatest arms race in the history of life. The fossil record tells a clear story. Almost simultaneously with the appearance of complex eyes, we see the appearance of complex defenses. Animals suddenly develop hard external shells, sharp spines, and other forms of protective armor. Organisms like Wiwaxia were covered in defensive spikes, while others developed the ability to burrow into the sediment, hiding from view. This is not a coincidence. It is a direct evolutionary response. The moment one animal could see another as a potential meal, the potential meal had to evolve ways to avoid being seen or to make itself too difficult to eat. The gentle, passive world of the Ediacaran was over. The Cambrian seas were now an arena of high stakes, where the ability to see and the ability to counter being seen became the primary drivers of evolution. The hunt had officially begun. In any arms race, the development of a new weapon inevitably leads to the development of a superweapon. In the Cambrian seas, the evolution of the eye gave rise to the world's first true apex predator, a creature so formidable it reigned at the top of the food chain for millions of years. Its name was Anomalocaris, the abnormal shrimp. But it was no shrimp. Growing up to a meter in length, it was a giant in its time, a swimming hunter of unparalleled sophistication. What set Anomalocaris apart was the perfect integration of three evolutionary innovations. First were its eyes. Perched on flexible stalks, it possessed two large, complex compound eyes, packed with thousands of lenses. These were among the most powerful visual organs on the planet, giving it exceptional vision for detecting and tracking prey. It could likely see with more detail and from a greater distance than any of its contemporaries. This powerful gaze was its guidance system. Second was its propulsion system. A series of undulating lobes along its body allowed it to swim with speed, grace, and agility, enabling it to actively pursue the targets it acquired with its vision. It was not a passive drifter, it was a guided missile. Finally, it had its weaponry. At the front of its body were two large spiny appendages, perfectly designed for grasping and manipulating prey. This combination of advanced sight, powerful locomotion, and effective capture tools made Anomalocaris the terror of the Cambrian. Its existence fundamentally changed the evolutionary pressures on every other animal in its environment. The world was now divided into the hunters and the hunted, and Anomalocaris was the ultimate hunter. The selective pressure it exerted was immense. For smaller animals like the trilobite, the gaze of an Anomalocaris was a constant threat. This pressure drove the rapid evolution of defenses. Trilobite shells became thicker. Some species developed the ability to roll into a protective ball, much like a modern pill bug. Others evolved to live in deeper, darker waters where vision was less effective. The very presence of this super predator accelerated the arms race, forcing prey to become faster, better armored, or better hidden. The predator-prey dynamic, fueled by vision, became a powerful engine of creativity, shaping body plans and behaviors in a dynamic dance of survival. Anomalocaris represents a pivotal moment, the point where vision was weaponized to its fullest extent. It was the embodiment of the New World Order. Its gaze was not just a sensory input, it was an expression of dominance. It demonstrated that the future of life on Earth would be shaped not just by competition for resources, but by the relentless, life-or-death struggle between seeing and being seen. The Cambrian arms race, ignited by the spark of vision, did not end. It diversified, branching out into a million different evolutionary paths, each exploring a new way to see or a new way to avoid being seen. The fundamental blueprint of the eye, once established, became a theme upon which evolution composed endless variations. Two major designs came to dominate the animal kingdom, each a masterpiece of engineering suited to a different way of life. The first was the compound eye, perfected by arthropods. Composed of hundreds or even thousands of individual units called ommatidia, it created a mosaic of the world. While not providing the sharpest resolution, it is unparalleled at detecting motion from a wide field of view, perfect for a fly needing to evade a swat or a dragonfly tracking its next meal on the wing. The second great design was the camera-style eye. Found in vertebrates and cephalopods like the octopus, it operates like a man-made camera. A single lens focuses light onto a light-sensitive sheet, the retina, creating one coherent, high-resolution image. This design is ideal for tasks requiring sharp focus and detail recognition. It is the eye of the eagle, capable of spotting a mouse from a mile away. It is the eye of the octopus, able to distinguish complex shapes and patterns. These two visual systems, compound and camera, represent two different solutions to the same problem: how to turn light into useful information. This diversification of sight was mirrored by an equally spectacular explosion in animal forms, colors, and behaviors. The visual world became a canvas for evolutionary art. The pressure to avoid a predator's gaze drove the evolution of camouflage to astonishing levels of sophistication. Creatures evolved to perfectly match the color and texture of their backgrounds, from the stick insect that mimics a twig to the flounder that can alter its skin pattern to blend in with the seafloor. In response, predators evolved sharper vision, better pattern recognition, and even the ability to see polarized light to cut through the shimmer of water and detect hidden prey. This visual dialogue also gave rise to the language of color. Some animals evolved bright warning coloration, advertising their toxicity to would-be predators. Others evolved elaborate displays for attracting mates, turning vision into a medium for courtship and selection. The peacock's tail is a testament to the power of the female gaze. From the iridescent shimmer of a butterfly's wing to the intimidating eye spots on a moth, every pattern and hue tells a story of visual communication. The ancient conflict that began in the Cambrian seas, the interplay between the seer and the seen, never ceased. It simply became more complex, more subtle, and more beautiful, creating the breathtaking diversity of life that fills our world today. Every form, every color, is a surviving strategy from the longest war in history. In a world suddenly filled with sight, to be seen was to be vulnerable. The ancient oceans, once a gentle soup of microbial life, had become an arena. The evolution of the eye in predators created an immediate and powerful selective pressure: develop a defense or disappear forever. The response from prey was swift and revolutionary, written in stone and shell across the globe. The age of armor had begun. The most iconic defenders of this new era were the trilobites. They were the architects of the world's first widespread, sophisticated defense system. Their bodies were covered in a complex exoskeleton, a shield forged from calcite minerals drawn directly from the seawater. This was not just a simple shell. It was an articulated suit of armor, allowing for flexibility and movement while providing robust protection. Many trilobites possessed their own advanced compound eyes, meaning they could see their attackers coming. When threatened, some species could enroll, tucking their soft underbelly away to present an almost impenetrable sphere to the would-be hunter. This simple yet brilliant tactic is still used by their distant terrestrial relatives, the pillbugs, 500 million years later. But the trilobites were not alone. The Cambrian seafloor became a gallery of defensive experiments. Creatures like Wiwaxia emerged, covered in a coat of mail made of overlapping scales and long, sharp spines that deterred any predator from attempting a bite. Hallucigenia, a creature so strange it was long reconstructed upside down, walked on stilt-like legs, and protected its back with a fearsome row of spikes. These were not passive organisms. They were living fortresses, each a unique solution to the problem of survival in a world of sight. Yet, defense is not the only path to survival. Another, equally profound strategy was emerging from the shadows. While the arthropods invested in external armor, a different lineage of animals was developing an internal innovation. Among them was a small, unassuming creature known as Pikaia. It had no shell, no spines, no obvious defenses. It was soft, small, and seemingly helpless. But it possessed something that would, in time, prove more significant than any exoskeleton: a flexible, fibrous rod running along its back called a notochord. This was the prototype for the vertebrate spine. The notochord acted as an anchor for muscles, allowing Pikaia to swim with a powerful, side-to-side motion. It was an escape artist. This marked the dawn of a great evolutionary divergence, the armored versus the agile. One path led to the great lineages of insects and crustaceans, the other to fish, amphibians, reptiles, and eventually, us. The arms race now had two competing philosophies: to build a better shield or to engineer a faster escape. But a third strategy was also taking shape, one based not on confrontation, but on deception. In the new visual world of the Cambrian, the most effective defense was often to avoid detection entirely. The evolutionary arms race was not only fought with armor and spines, but also with light and shadow. The art of hiding, of becoming invisible in plain sight, became a critical survival skill. For both predator and prey, the game was now one of perception. The key was to control what the enemy's new eyes could and could not see. The simplest form of this art is camouflage, blending into the background. While the fossil record rarely preserves color, the shapes and textures of ancient animals offer compelling clues. We can infer that many Cambrian creatures adopted the hues and patterns of their environment. Flat-bodied trilobites lying motionless on the seafloor may have had shells that mimicked the color and texture of the sediment. Other organisms living among the swaying fronds of ancient algae would have likely developed green and brown patterns to disappear from view. This strategy required not just the right appearance, but the right behavior, the discipline of stillness in the face of danger. A more advanced technique is disruptive coloration. Bold patterns, spots, and stripes can break up an animal's body outline, making it difficult for a predator to recognize its shape. A hunter's brain is trained to look for a specific silhouette. By disrupting that outline, an animal can confuse the predator for a crucial second, creating an opportunity for escape. This principle is so effective that it is still one of the most common forms of camouflage in the animal kingdom today, from the stripes of a tiger to the spots of a leopard shark. Camouflage, however, is a double-edged sword. The same techniques used by prey to hide from predators could be used by predators to ambush their prey. The first stealth hunters would have been masters of concealment. They would lie in wait, perfectly still, their bodies blending seamlessly with a rock or a patch of seaweed. Unsuspecting victims, swimming by, would have no idea of the danger until it was too late. This added a new layer of psychological tension to the Cambrian seas. The threat was no longer just what you could see, but the unseen danger that could be lurking anywhere. This silent war of perception and deception was playing out across the planet's oceans. Every creature was part of an intricate web of visibility. Survival depended on seeing without being seen. The evidence for these sophisticated strategies, however, remained a secret, locked away in layers of ancient rock. It would take an extraordinary discovery in an unlikely place to finally reveal the full cast of characters in this epic drama and bring their hidden world into the light. For centuries, our understanding of early animal life was fragmented, based on the scattered remains of hard shells and bones. The soft-bodied creatures, the majority of life, seemed lost to time. That all changed in the summer of 1909, high in the Canadian Rocky Mountains. Here, on a remote ridge, a paleontologist named Charles Doolittle Walcott made a discovery that would rewrite the book on the history of life. Walcott, the distinguished secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, was searching for fossils along what is now known as Fossil Ridge. He happened upon a slab of dark shale that had split open. Within it was the perfectly preserved impression of a delicate, lace-like creature, unlike anything he had ever seen. He had stumbled upon the Burgess Shale, one of the most important fossil deposits ever found. It was a window into a lost world. The site is a type of deposit known as a Lagerstätte, a German term for a place of extraordinary preservation. The conditions here were perfect. Around 508 million years ago, a section of the seafloor community was swept away by an underwater mudslide. The creatures were buried instantly in fine sediment, in an environment with no oxygen. This process prevented decay and scavenging, preserving not just the hard parts, but the fleeting details of soft tissues, guts, gills, antennae, and even traces of nervous systems. It was a near-perfect snapshot of an entire ecosystem. As Walcott and his team excavated the quarry, they unearthed a menagerie of bizarre animals that challenged the imagination. There was Opabinia, with its 5 stalked eyes and a long frontal nozzle tipped with a grasping claw. There was Waiwaxia, a slug-like creature covered in scales and spines. And there was the formidable Anomalocaris, a large predator with powerful swimming lobes and fearsome frontal appendages. These were not simple, primitive worms. They were complex animals with specialized bodies, clear evidence of a sophisticated and mature ecosystem. Walcott spent years collecting tens of thousands of specimens, meticulously documenting his finds. However, he interpreted them through the lens of his time. He diligently tried to shoehorn these weird wonders into the existing, known animal groups. He classified Opabinia as a crustacean and Anomalocaris as a shrimp's body. In his view, he had found the primitive ancestors of modern life, but he hadn't fully grasped the radical nature of what he held in his hands. The true, revolutionary implications of the Burgess Shale would lie dormant, filed away in museum drawers for over half a century, waiting for a new generation of scientists to look upon these creatures with fresh eyes and recognize them for what they truly were: emissaries from a completely alien yet foundational chapter in the story of life. For decades, the Burgess Shale stood as a magnificent but lonely peak in our understanding of the Cambrian. Its bizarre creatures were so unique that some scientists wondered if it represented a localized, failed evolutionary experiment. Was this explosion of life a global phenomenon, or was it confined to a single ancient lagoon? The answer would emerge in 1984 from the rolling hills of Yunnan province in southern China, and it would change everything. Paleontologist Hao Xiangguang was surveying the rocks near the town of Chengjiang when he discovered a fossil of a familiar-looking creature, a type of arthropod known as Naraoya. But this was no ordinary fossil. Like the specimens from the Burgess Shale, it was exquisitely preserved, showing details of its soft anatomy. Hao had discovered a second Lagerstätte, another perfect window into the Cambrian. But this window looked upon an even older world. The Chengjiang biota, as it came to be known, dates back to 518 million years ago, a full 10 million years before the animals of the Burgess Shale were buried. What the Chengjiang fossils revealed was breathtaking. They showed a vibrant and diverse ecosystem teeming with life, confirming that the Cambrian explosion was indeed a worldwide event. Many of the strange animal groups first identified in Canada had counterparts in China. There were armored lobopodians, early arthropods, and a host of other creatures that proved these lineages were already well established and widespread millions of years earlier than previously thought. The preservation was so remarkable that some fossils even contained unhatched embryos, providing an unparalleled glimpse into the reproductive biology of these ancient animals. Among the most significant finds at Chengjiang was a small, fish-like creature named Milocunmingia. Barely an inch long, it possessed a distinct head with possible eyes, a series of gill pouches, and most importantly, a skull and a skeleton made of cartilage. It was, unequivocally, a vertebrate. Here, in these ancient Chinese rocks, was one of the earliest known members of our own lineage. The discovery pushed back the origin of vertebrates by millions of years, placing our own distant ancestors firmly in the midst of this first great evolutionary arms race. The Chinese fossils also provided some of the most direct evidence of predation. Scientists found trilobites with distinct, crescent-shaped bite marks on their shells, some of which showed signs of healing. This was the smoking gun. It was tangible proof of the life-or-death struggles that were unfolding in these ancient seas. The arms race was not a theoretical concept. It was a physical reality, etched into the armor of its survivors. Chengjiang did not just echo the story told by the Burgess Shale, it amplified it, providing a deeper, richer, and more complete narrative of life's most creative period. The fossils of the Burgess Shale and Chengjiang are like pages from a lost encyclopedia of life. For decades, we could only marvel at the illustrations. But today, armed with new technologies and a deeper understanding of genetics, we are finally beginning to read the text and piece together the story of the Cambrian arms race. This modern synthesis is transforming our view of these ancient creatures from strange curiosities into key players in a global drama. Take Anomalocaris, the great white shark of the Cambrian. For years, it was a puzzle. Its grasping frontal appendages were thought to be shrimp tails, its circular mouth a fossilized jellyfish, and its body a sea cucumber. It was only through painstaking reconstruction that scientists realized these were all parts of a single, enormous predator, perhaps the first apex predator on Earth. Using digital modeling and biomechanical analysis, we can now resurrect Anomalocaris. We can see how its powerful lobes propelled it through the water and how its huge, stalked compound eyes, containing thousands of lenses, gave it superb vision for hunting. It was a creature perfectly engineered for the new visual world. This explosion of physical forms was not caused by the sudden appearance of new genes. The genetic toolkit for building complex bodies, the master control genes like the Hox genes that dictate body plans from head to tail, already existed in the quiet eons before the Cambrian. The key was a change in how these genes were used. The trigger for this change appears to have been the evolution of vision itself. The PAX6 gene, which orchestrates eye development in nearly all animals, from flies to humans, was the catalyst. Once this ancient gene was deployed to build effective eyes, it unleashed a cascade of evolutionary consequences. Vision created a new kind of ecological pressure. For the first time, animals could actively hunt and be hunted from a distance. This initiated a powerful and relentless feedback loop. Better eyes in predators favored the survival of prey with better defenses, armor, spines, or camouflage. The rise of well-defended prey, in turn, favored predators with even sharper vision, stronger claws, and faster bodies. This reciprocal escalation, this biological arms race, drove the rapid diversification of animal forms. It forced life to become more complex, more mobile, and more intelligent in a geological blink of an eye. From a simple light-sensitive spot on a single-celled organism, the journey of the eye transformed the planet. It filled the oceans with a riot of new forms, establishing virtually all the major animal body plans that exist today. This ancient conflict, fought in primordial seas 500 million years ago, is not just a story about strange fossils. It is the story of the birth of our modern world. It is the story of how seeing, for the first time, changed everything. Before the eyes, the world was a simpler, softer place. For 3 billion years, life had been a microscopic affair. Then came the Ediacaran Period, a strange twilight era populated by enigmatic, soft-bodied organisms that quilted the shallow sea floors. They were passive filter feeders, absorbing nutrients from the water, untroubled by the notion of a chase. They had no heads, no limbs, no mouths in the way we understand them. And crucially, they had no eyes. Theirs was a world of touch and chemical gradients, a slow, gentle existence governed by proximity. Then, 541 million years ago, the curtain rose on the Cambrian Period, and the character of life changed forever. In a geological blink of an eye, the placid Ediacaran gardens vanished, replaced by a riot of biological innovation. This was the Cambrian Explosion, an unprecedented burst of evolutionary creativity. Over a mere 10 to 20 million years, virtually every major animal body plan, or phylum, that exists today, made its first appearance. It was as if a cosmic architect had thrown open the blueprints for the animal kingdom. Fossil beds like the Burgess Shale in Canada and Zhejiang in China provide a stunning snapshot of this new world. Here, we find the first creatures with exoskeletons, with jointed legs, with complex feeding apparatus. We find the familiar, yet alien forms of trilobites, with their segmented bodies and, for the first time, sophisticated compound eyes. We find the bizarre, armored Wiwaxia and the spiny Hallucigenia, creatures seemingly designed for defense. And we find the formidable Anomalocaris, a large swimming predator with formidable grasping claws and 2 large stalked eyes that gave it a panoramic view of its domain. This explosion of form and function was not a coincidence. It was a direct response to a revolutionary new technology: vision. The first true eyes transformed the very nature of existence. The world was no longer a place of gentle bumping and chemical tasting. It was now a landscape of defined shapes, of distant movements, of sudden shadows. For the first time, an organism could perceive another from afar. This single development lit a fire under evolution. Safety was no longer guaranteed by just being present. It now required armor, spines, shells, and the ability to burrow. Being a successful eater was no longer about passively filtering. It required speed, stealth, and weaponry. The great unfolding was not just an explosion of life, but the dawn of the world's first and most enduring arms race, a conflict fueled by the simple, terrifying fact of being seen. An image is merely a pattern of light. It carries information, but without a processor to decode it, it is meaningless noise. The evolution of the eye, as revolutionary as it was, would have been a dead end without a parallel revolution: the evolution of the brain. The Cambrian Explosion was not just a revolution in bodies, but a big bang for cognition. To see is one thing. To understand what is being seen is another entirely. Before vision, nervous systems were simple. A basic nerve net, like that found in a modern jellyfish, was sufficient to coordinate simple movements and react to immediate touch or chemical stimuli. It was a purely reflexive system. But the data streaming from the first complex eyes was a torrent of information. It contained details about shape, size, distance, speed, and direction. Processing this required a centralized command center, a hub of neurons that could interpret the visual data and make a decision. Friend, foe, food, obstacle. This was the genesis of the brain. In Cambrian fossils, we see the first clear evidence of cephalization, the concentration of nerve tissue and sensory organs at one end of the body, forming a distinct head. The trilobite is a perfect example. Its 2 sophisticated compound eyes, each with dozens or even hundreds of individual lenses, fed a constant stream of information to a primitive brain located just behind them. This brain had to stitch together hundreds of separate inputs into a single, coherent mosaic image of the world. It had to calculate the trajectory of a falling piece of debris or the approach of a potential threat. This new neural hardware unlocked new behaviors. An animal could now navigate its environment with purpose, actively seeking food or shelter rather than stumbling upon it. It could engage in strategic thinking, however rudimentary. A predator could anticipate the movement of its prey. A prey animal could recognize the silhouette of a predator and take evasive action. The world was no longer just a series of immediate sensations. It was a map of possibilities and dangers. The arms race that began with the eye was now being fought on a new battlefield, the mind. The bigger the brain, the better the processing, the greater the chance of survival. The simple act of seeing forced life to become not just more complex in its form, but profoundly more intelligent in its function. For the first time in the 3 billion-year history of life, one creature could look at another from a distance and see not just an obstacle, but a meal. This was the moment the predator-prey dynamic as we know it was born, and it would become the primary engine of evolution for the next 500 million years. The world's first arms race had begun in earnest, a relentless cycle of offense and defense, action and reaction, all driven by the power of sight. On the offensive side stood creatures like Anomalocaris. At up to a meter in length, it was the largest animal of its time, a true apex predator. Its primary weapons were its large, stalked compound eyes, which provided excellent, near 360-degree vision. It could hang motionless in the water column, scanning the seabed below. Once it spotted a target, like an unsuspecting trilobite, it would use its powerful swimming lobes to descend rapidly, snatching the prey with its two formidable grasping appendages. Its circular mouth, lined with hard plates, was perfectly suited for dealing with the armored defenses of its victims. Anomalocaris was a creature built for the hunt, and its design was a direct consequence of its visual acuity. In response, prey animals scrambled to develop countermeasures. The evolutionary battlefield became littered with new defensive technologies. The most common was armor. Trilobites developed thick, mineralized exoskeletons, a shield against attack. When threatened, many species could roll up into a ball, like a modern pill bug, protecting their soft underbellies. Others, like Wiwaxia, bristled with long, sharp spines, making them a mouthful for any would-be attacker. Camouflage also likely made its first appearance, with patterns and colorations designed to break up an animal's outline against the seafloor. Behavior, too, became a defense. The simple act of burrowing into the sediment, of hiding, was a direct response to the threat from above. This dynamic created a powerful feedback loop. Better eyes in predators favored prey with better armor. Better armor favored predators with stronger claws or more intelligent hunting strategies. Faster prey favored faster predators. Every evolutionary advance on one side demanded a corresponding advance on the other. This relentless pressure accelerated the pace of evolution dramatically. Life became faster, stronger, more heavily armed, and more cunning. The Cambrian seas were not a peaceful garden. They were a high-stakes proving ground, and the price of failure was extinction. Look in a mirror. The eyes that look back at you are more than just biological cameras. They are ancient artifacts, carrying a genetic memory that stretches back over 500 million years to the dawn of the animal kingdom. The intense evolutionary pressures of the Cambrian arms race, the desperate struggle to see and to avoid being seen, left an indelible mark on the very code of life. This legacy is written in our DNA. At the heart of eye development is a master control gene known as PAX6. Remarkably, this gene is shared across almost the entire animal kingdom. The same fundamental genetic switch that tells a human embryo where to build an eye also instructs a fruit fly to build its compound eye. Scientists have demonstrated this profound connection in the lab, activating the mouse version of the PAX6 gene in a fly and inducing it to grow an eye on its leg. The eye it grows is a fly's eye, not a mouse's, because the gene simply gives the command, "Build an eye here," using the local genetic toolkit. This shared ancestry reveals that the blueprint for the eye was established very early, a precious and powerful tool that evolution has conserved for 500 million years. But the legacy goes deeper than just the physical structure. The Cambrian War between predator and prey hardwired fundamental behaviors into our nervous systems. Consider the fight or flight response. That jolt of adrenaline, the heightened awareness, the rapid heartbeat you feel in a moment of danger, that is a direct echo of a trilobite detecting the shadow of a Nomalocaris. Our brains are primed to detect threats, a neurological inheritance from ancestors who lived in a state of constant vigilance. Forward-facing eyes, giving us stereoscopic vision and excellent depth perception, are the legacy of predatory ancestors who needed to accurately judge the distance to their next meal. Our ability to perceive a vast spectrum of colors helped our primate ancestors distinguish ripe fruit from unripe and nutritious leaves from toxic ones. Our entire perception of reality is shaped by this ancient hardware. The very way we process movement, patterns, and shapes was honed in the high-stakes environment of the primeval seas. We are the descendants of the survivors of the world's first Great War. Every time we catch a ball, drive a car, or simply recognize a face in a crowd, we are using a sophisticated visual system that was forged in the crucible of the Cambrian Explosion. We carry the history of that epic struggle within every cell of our bodies. The Cambrian arms race never truly ended. It just changed scale. The contest of predator and prey, of offense and defense, culminated in a species that could see not just its next meal, but the patterns of the stars, the structure of the atom, and the code of life itself. That species is us. The evolutionary journey of the eye, which began as a simple tool for survival, has given humanity the power to reshape the planet. Our specific type of vision, with high acuity, forward-facing, color-perceptive eyes, was a critical ingredient in our rise. This stereoscopic setup provided the depth perception necessary for the fine motor control needed to create and use complex tools. It allowed us to judge distances with precision, first to throw a spear, and much later to build a skyscraper. Our visual system was also key to developing complex societies. We communicate vast amounts of information through subtle facial expressions and body language, all perceived visually. This visual communication built the bonds of trust and cooperation that allowed our ancestors to hunt together, form communities, and build civilizations. With vision came the ability to record what we saw. The first cave paintings were a direct attempt to translate the three-dimensional world seen by the eye into a two-dimensional representation. This impulse led directly to the invention of writing, a system of visual symbols that allowed knowledge to be passed down through generations, accumulating over time. Science itself is a profoundly visual endeavor. From Galileo pointing his telescope to the heavens, to a microbiologist peering into a microscope, our greatest discoveries have been based on observation, on seeing the world in new ways. But this extraordinary power of sight is a double-edged sword. The same eyes that allow us to appreciate the beauty of a sunset also allow us to see a forest as timber, a mountain as a source of ore, and an ocean as a place to dump our waste. Our ability to see patterns from a distance, to plan and execute large-scale projects, has enabled us to alter the global environment at a speed and scale unmatched in Earth's history. The predator-prey engine, which once drove the evolution of armor and speed, now drives our quest for resources and technological dominance. The journey that started with a patch of light-sensitive cells has brought us to this moment. We are the first species to see our own planet from the outside, a fragile blue sphere in the void. The legacy of the first eyes has bestowed upon us an incredible gift and a profound responsibility. The ultimate question is, what will we do with this power? How will we choose to see the world, and what future will that vision create?